Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the AIS series Remote Control, where we continue our conversations with the creative people driving the entertainment industry forward. I'm Buzz Hayes, and as we kick off this episode, we now know this year's official Academy Award nominees, and we're thrilled to see that our guests today were nominated for this year's Academy Award for Best Visual Effects for their work on Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. But before we officially introduce our guest today, we want to take a moment to thank our friends Gary Radburn and Matt Allard at Dell, Rick Champagne at NVIDIA, Michael Mansouri at Meetmo, and the folks at Computer Graphics World and the NAB show. This year, NAB will be back in Las Vegas live, and AIS will be kicking off the show with our Technology Awards, held for the very first time in Las Vegas at the Wynn Hotel on April 23rd. The call for entries can be found on our website, theadvancedimagingsociety.com. And now, let's get started with our guest today. The freshly minted 2022 Oscar-nominated visual effects team from Marvel Studios and Weta FX for Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, directed by Destin Daniel Cretton, brings us the origin story of the newest superhero to enter the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Simu Liu stars as Shang-Chi, who must confront his past and the legacy of his legendary crime lord father when he's drawn into the mysterious web of the Ten Rings organization. The Hollywood Reporter says the film's most thrilling set piece is essentially a hallway fight scene set on a speeding bus, and Liu looks the very picture of cool as he twists, swings, and kicks his way through a half dozen henchmen as the camera breathlessly tracks his every move. And we have the visual effects creators of that scene and some other breathtaking sequences joining us as our guest today. First up, Christopher Townsend serves as visual effects supervisor at Marvel Studios. His work can be seen in films like Iron Man 3, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and as of yesterday, the Academy Award-nominated Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Welcome, Christopher.
Thanks very much. Great to be here.
Also from Marvel Studios, visual effects supervisor Joe Farrell joins us today. Joe was part of Christopher's visual effects team for the Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. A partial list of his other impressive credits include the work on Jon Favreau's The Jungle Book, Wolf of Wall Street, The Amazing Spider-Man, and the visual effects Academy Award-winning Golden Compass. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you very much for having me.
And completing the trifecta of visual effects talent we have today, welcome Sean Walker, visual effects supervisor from Weta FX. Sean's early work was on the groundbreaking film Avatar. He's since worked on nearly every major Marvel Studio film Weta has been involved with, and he served as Weta FX's visual effects supervisor for Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
The team has brought some incredible clips to share from some of the best visual effects sequences in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. But first, congratulations to all of you for your Academy Award nomination yesterday. You must have woken up with a big smile on your face.
We did. It was brilliant.
Yeah, it was great.
It was awesome. Thank you.
Christopher, you were the lead visual effects supervisor in this project. So tell us a little bit about how and when you first got involved, and what was the process and the time frame for getting this team assembled to make the film?
Oh, goodness. I got involved pretty soon after Destin was brought on as director and also as a writer. And I was fortunate enough to be invited to a meeting with him where we sat down and he sort of, interviewed me, and I was presented as a potential visual effects supervisor for him, and he was okay with that. So we then worked very diligently for the next probably 6 or 7 months in pre-production together. And we brought Joe on a few months later as our second unit visual effects supervisor and additional visual effects supervisor, who was going to be handling several sequences, as well as handling the work on for actually doing the work at second unit. So yeah, all told, I was on the project for over a couple of years, and yeah, incredibly exciting.
That's amazing. And it's the work shows. I mean, it's beautiful what you've done, and to see that you were able to spend that kind of time on it, I think it really shows in the work. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, that's great. Now, Joe, you were responsible for the visual effects on some of the incredible fight sequences, including the complex choreographed fight scene on the moving bus that we're going to show in a few minutes. Tell us a little bit about your role in working with the team to bring those scenes together.
Sure. Yeah, Chris wanted me to look after the bus sequence. So, Chris was obviously the overall look of what we were doing in that, but I sort of was handling the details. As far as the martial arts, I worked closely with the incredible stunt team headed up by Brad Allen, who unfortunately passed away recently. He had this amazing team that would come in and stunt viz the sequence, and then we would basically glue in all around that to make that whole very complicated sequence work overall.
That's amazing. I think a lot of people don't fully understand, especially when there are stunts involved, how much rehearsal goes into that, and including visual effects. Could you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, so I mean, I think they spent about 2.5 to 3 months just leading up just for the bus sequence alone, just due to the fact that I think overall there's about 180 shots in that sequence, and they tried any number of various things, and we were pretty much a supporting role at that point. Our work pretty much came while we were shooting, and then during post when we were finishing up all the work and putting all the pieces back together. So they were a strong force to drive how that were, and working with Destin to decide, what was happening as far as the story was concerned.
Yeah, I'm always amazed with sequences like that, how fast they're cut together, but how long it takes to assemble those pieces. It's pretty amazing. What were you going to say, Christopher?
Well, I was just saying that it was that sequence particularly was a great sort of example of how well the different departments work together. I think obviously it was a very stunt heavy sequence that had to be very carefully choreographed, and the martial arts sequences, and you'll see that in the film there are very specific martial arts styles depicted in each individual fight and with each character. So it was very, very carefully choreographed in that way. But one of the interesting things from a visual effects point of view and a sequence sort of setup point of view is how you actually start to build that. And we started with some storyboards, and we in visual effects started working in previs and trying to sort of plan out, blocking out areas of how you could, what those fights could be. And at the same time, stunts were working on the stage and just working with cardboard boxes and poles and just very, very simplistic props, just to try and figure out the pacing and the style and the camera work. And then it was very much a feeding back and forth between stunts and previs back to stunts to try and sort of fine tune until we got to a point of, yes, we kind of know where it is. And then stunts took over almost exclusively for the interior shots, particularly to plan out exactly what those stunts would be and what the cameras would be. And I think the interesting thing is throughout, as you said, it was a corridor sequence on a moving bus. And it's not just a moving bus, it's a moving bus that's shaking and turning and twisting and jumping, bouncing up and down and things. And that affects an awful lot of the choreography. And so we were able to put them out onto a full gimbaled set and actually have them rehearse for several weeks, right, Joe, on the gimbaled set on the bus before we actually started shooting, so they could really fine tune those performances.
That's amazing. Yeah, because obviously safety is first and foremost when it comes to these sequences, and people don't realize how hard it is and how many obstacles are in their way, especially if they were trying to do this on a practical bus driving through the city where it's not going to move the same every time. So that was a great luxury to be able to control that, but still
Absolutely.
Incredibly difficult.
You need to have the time, and I think it shows. And like Joe said, the amount of time that they spent in stunts sort of rehearsing it and really carefully honing it was incredible. And I think from a visual effects point of view, we were there, as you said, in a supporting role, trying to figure out, well, we can't shoot this with these seats in place, so we have to remove these seats and we'll add them in digitally, or these poles, or we'll have to rebuild the bus in this particular part or whatever else. So we were definitely there to assist for those interior shots particularly.
Well, it was worth it because it's an amazing sequence. Now, Sean, you came to the project from Weta Effects, and we have some great sequences of the compositing that your team did with the creature battles and water simulations and things like that. So tell us a little bit about how your team from Weta interacted with the Marvel team to create those moments.
Yeah, so we started quite early on as well. Chris popped around to New Zealand before going down to Australia to film the majority of the sequences. And we started quite early because we were tasked with designing the dragon and the beast before they even started filming. The reason being, we wanted to develop the look of the dragons and allow on-set to create life-size replica bucks for the actors to interact with and ride and do all of their stunt work on top. So yeah, that's kind of where we started. Very, very early on, we helped out a little bit with some of the sequences as they were filming, and it was a very close collaborative relationship the whole way through, just because of the evolving story and the overall design.
Mm-hmm. And could you talk a little bit about collectively about how you collaborated? Again, this is all being done during a global pandemic, right? So it's not the easiest thing in the world to jump on a plane and go hang out on set and get what you need and run home. So could you talk a little bit about what the process looked like when you weren't together on set?
Yeah, I think it was. We were very fortunate that we were able. Damien Carr, the visual effects producer, and I were very fortunate that we were able to go down and visit Weta and sort of get to know Sean and his team, which is incredibly important because you need that shorthand later on. And so understanding, sort of having that a little bit of FaceTime, as it were, was incredibly useful. And obviously we thought that the usual way is that Sean and several others of the Weta team would have come up to Sydney where we were shooting and actually be on set shooting with us. And alas, we were in the middle of a pandemic, so that couldn't happen. So there was collaborating as best we could with frequent conference calls and video calls throughout the whole process was incredibly important. One of the things that we were able to do was previs an awful lot of the sequences, and particularly the sequences that Weta was working on. And so that enabled us to work with the previs and then hand that previs, which was done by a company called The Third Floor, and hand that over to Weta, and then they would take it and they would look at it. And either they would sort of take authorship of it based on comments from the director and the editors and me and and Joe and the creative team, so on our side in Sydney, and then work and continue to finesse, or we would sort of hand it to them, and then they would say, well, yeah, we can try and do this, but in amongst it all, we actually need to take it back into the previous land and work with it there. So it was very much a back and forth process, very iterative, and you absolutely need this sort of very close creative collaboration and this trust in your teams throughout to be able to do that successfully.
That's so true. And what were your experiences like, Sean, for example, in this remote collaboration thing? Did anything strike you as particularly challenging or interesting about that process? Or is that typically the way you work when you're working all over the world?
Yes and no. Even internally, we were working remotely with each other at a certain point. We had just come off my previous show, Black Widow, which we delivered just like in the early months of lockdown as well. And so we kind of knew that we could do this. We had set up a system internally that allowed us to communicate, to review work, to just workflows that allowed us to efficiently get through the amount of work. And we were lucky actually in New Zealand, because after just a few months of full lockdown, the whole country pretty much opened back up again. So it was business as usual at a certain point, and that's actually how we got to deliver the show. We were all working together in-house all together. So for us, it didn't impact us as much as I think it would have should we had not been in New Zealand.
Right. Well, that's great. So I think maybe now's the time to look at some of the clips that you brought for us to look at today. So if you don't mind, we're going to talk about the first clip, which is the start of the iconic bus fight scene. So could you tell us a little bit about what we're going to see here?
Yeah, so this is the start of the fight itself in the bus, or the start of the sort of interaction between the various characters. One of the things to remember is this was all shot on a bus, on a gimbal, in a studio in the wonderful world of Sydney, not San Francisco, which is ultimately where it's shown. So we also shot some array plates, which I think Joe can talk about, in San Francisco, and that was then stitched together. Those array plates that we shot with a different photography unit, and those were then composited in behind the characters throughout the whole sequence.
Amazing. So let's go ahead and roll the clip, and feel free to talk over the clip to tell us what went into this as we're watching it.
What you're seeing here is basically these interiors, the beginning of the fight sequence, and it's this intricate ballet that both the stunts and visual effects needed to do with this sequence. Various different speeds that we needed to do. We shot phantoms in here, Aries, all sorts of really different kinds of rigging, needing to remove chairs, things like that. Lots of pretty incredible digital face replacements that were needing to be done here, although our actors are doing quite a lot of the stunt work. But shots like this have got some pretty interesting and very, very complicated facial reconstructions that needed to be done. We shot in about 3 different cities. We shot here in Los Angeles. We shot in San Francisco, array plates and real stunts. So any of the exterior stuff was done in San Francisco with this pretty amazing stunt SFX team that was set up there to do a lot of the actual buses driving around, where we did extensions and things like that. In order to get the footage out the exterior, Bill Pope, our DP, set up a lighting scenario that allowed us to be able to cut from shot to shot, because although this was a quite well thought out sequence, we still needed to be able to cut from sequence to sequence. So we didn't want lighting to suddenly jump depending on where the edits were. So as far as the lighting in the background, we actually jumped on a bus in San Francisco, Chris, myself, and Bill, and we were actually using reference trying to figure it out, and quite surprised at how the lighting was. When we got to Sydney, set up the lighting, and then in San Francisco, we did various different really complicated array plates that were, each camera was shooting the red camera 8K, so we had like 96,000 pixels of these arrays that we needed to combine to put into here. And then our compositing artists over at Luma spent a great deal of time integrating the foreground and the background into those array plates and stitching it all back together.
Now, as we've discussed, there's some real challenges that are associated with trying to create a fight scene like this one in the bus. So we have another clip now to show that takes place a little bit later in the sequence. So let's have a look at this as you talk about it, and talk about some of the challenges that you experienced on this part of the sequence.
So what you're seeing here is now where visual effects is getting a little bit more involved. This was a very specific set piece of what we call the old boy shot, for obvious reasons, for those of you that have seen the film, The Old Boy. And we wanted this very sort of comic book poses throughout. So there's some digital double versions of characters in there, lots of face replacement. We're seeing the glowing blade of Razor Fist, which was this sort of this metallic arm with a blade that would come out of his amputated arm. We're seeing this CG world between the two buses of this chaos and this of the mechanics trying to make it as dangerous as possible throughout. And the whole sequence has to feel as believable as possible while still having this strange guy with a razor blade for an arm. Obviously, humor is a major part of any Marvel movie, so we get that with Awkwafina's character. And we've actually had the bus driving down a street, and we ended up adding a rear end, a CG end, back half of the bus on those driving shots. So there's a real combination of practical photography done on the streets of San Francisco with our photography in Sydney.
Yeah, we were actually, a lot of this stuff here, we ended up sort of trying to figure out how to make the bus actually go downhill, because the sequence is about 6 minutes long, and actually, you know, we were trying to find the right roads to do it on, so modifying roads and twisting tunnels and things like that. And as Chris said, any of the practical shots, we would then sort of slot them in where they serve the story best, and then adding the digital piece on there. Razor Fist has a green prosthetic arm with a sort of a long extension, a rubber extension, so that we always knew where the end of the blade was, which was always tricky because his hand wasn't nearly as long as that blade. We did various different variations of trying to figure out whether that blade should be brighter, more, you know, more intense, or more subtle, and just keeping it simple. And this next big shot, this one here, was the big shot where it only takes place over about 3 seconds, but in the edit here, I think it's about 8 seconds long. It was definitely one of the most complicated shots, and we spent about a year working on that shot alone.
Yeah, it is funny when you think about it, the tremendous amount of time and effort that goes into so much of this, and that is sort of the hallmark of visual effects, I think, and it's one of the things that's most interesting and that most people don't think about, but the fine-tuning of exactly how the glass breaks, or the way the sparks look or whatever it may be, everything is very, very specifically designed and art directed, as it were, but always trying to keep it as grounded as possible and make it feel as real as possible in this very unreal scenario. It's always the challenge.
We even had safety things there too. There's a lot of times where actually the bus actually would turn like 45 degrees on this incredible gimbal that the SFX team built. So we had harnesses that we actually had to put on a lot of these performers. Some of them were extras, most of them being stunt people, of course. And so at one point they're jumping over a hinge there. Well, that hinge is all completely replaced. So giant sections of this bus, like this next shot coming up here, for instance, the one where he jumps up, that whole back of the bus is digital because we weren't able to actually sandwich those two buses together. So this part here is pretty much entirely digital except for Simu and his stunt performer in that one.
So now we're moving from a confined fighting space inside a bus to putting our actors on a scaffolding to battle it out, which I'm sure created a whole other set of challenges. So could you tell us a little bit about what we're going to see in this clip, and then we'll roll the clip so you can talk about it?
Sure. This was a really interesting and very different sort of feeling sequence to almost everything else in the film, and therefore I thought very exciting. It was what we considered our sort of high concept piece. We're on a high up on a wall of a building which is currently under construction, and it's a mirrored building, and we're in the city of Macau. The original idea was for us to go to Macau and do plate photography and use that plate photography throughout. Unfortunately, pandemic hit, which meant that we couldn't do that, so we ultimately had to create the entire city digitally. So what you see in this next clip is going to be the photography of our characters on scaffolding on a 3-story set, and the set is against a mirrored building, and it's actually on a hinge which is able to tilt up to about 45 degrees, and that was to assist in the actual stunt work. Because obviously there's an awful lot of wires and safety harnesses and things that are needed both for the characters, for the stunt performers, our actors, and also our camera operators, as well as they're flying around all over the place. And in and amongst scaffolding, that can be quite tricky. So we had the ability to tilt the set, which allowed them to slide down and still stay relatively safe. It was a very exciting sequence to create. Something again that was incredibly carefully pre-vised and stunt-vised, and again I think it was a good example of showing the really tight relationship between stunts and practical and visual effects.
That sounds great. Well, let's go ahead and roll the clip and have us tell you what went into it as we're watching it.
A very, as Chris mentioned, high concept scenario. The entire city that you see there is made digitally. So also you'll notice that we built about a 3-story set here, which is a very large set. It's about 40 foot tall. We were able to angle it about 45 degrees. But what we're seeing is with digital blends between digital characters. We're stitching various different plates. We're also extending cameras out beyond what they were actually able to do on set. So we would shoot a lot of these things up close, and then we would extract that out, sometimes reprojecting it back on and reconstructing it. The stunt team did a very elaborate, almost old-fashioned kind of stunt sequence, almost Charlie Chaplin-esque. And what that meant was that all of these choreographed moves need to edit into very particular ways. So it made the final edit of this sequence really difficult to figure out all the logistics, because we needed to know where all the guards were as they were moving around from level to level, and then needing all of that. It's a very dark scene, so the entire sequence needed to be offset with a nice silhouette. So we had graphic design of these big billboards behind. So you'll see in a lot of these shots, they're actually quite dark, and that we're silhouetting them. This shot here is a digital handoff starts off real and ends real. And then through these sequences here, that is actually Simu doing these performances. So sometimes we might do slight little tweaks to some of these shots just to enhance what the actor is doing, but he did such an amazing job with a lot of this practically. The interesting thing about this was it's shot actually on a reflective surface. So with the reflective surface, you get the entire reflection of the crew, all the lighting that is being put into the scene. And so we had to remove all the lighting, all the crew, but then also individually roto every single one of the reflections off. And the reason we did that is because we really need those reflections. They need to be there. But we needed to then isolate them so that we could modify their black levels in order for them to stand different to them in the foreground. So it was a really fine line to make sure that that was correct in the final grade.
So we've talked about the complexity of these fight scenes and a little bit about what goes into it on set. Could you talk a little bit about the visual effects teams and the fact that you had vendors from all over the world working on this and how that worked in terms of coordinating their efforts to try and make this look all cohesive and beautiful?
Yeah, I think it's always one of the big challenges is to try and figure out the casting of different visual effects companies for the various sequences and the bits and pieces in the film. And in the same way that you cast the best actor, so you cast the best visual effects companies. And we're very fortunate that we have a long history with a lot of visual effects companies, and there's an awful lot of talented artists and production teams out there, and we've been incredibly lucky to be working with so many of them. So you go to specific companies who have particular strengths and they're known for particular things, and you also go to companies and you think that maybe if you give them something a little bit outside of their comfort zone, they may step up to the plate and do something pretty extraordinary. And it's very exciting to work with both sets of sort of scenarios. So obviously Weta was one of our major companies that we went to, our cornerstone company, as we would call it, and they handle an awful lot of the end battle. Obviously they've got a huge experience, a wealth of experience with creating these massive worlds and these environments and incredibly complex sequences. And so we were very fortunate to be working with Sean and his team at Weta. We went to Trickster in Germany for a lot of the smaller animation stuff, of the character animation of all the other characters who aren't the big beasts and demons and dragons at the end of the film. So they were responsible for Morris, particularly the six-legged winged beast, our little furry creature, and all the other fantastical creatures that you see throughout the film. We then also went to Digital Domain, who created a lot of the compound stuff of Wenwu's compound. And again, they've done a lot of environment work, which has been beautiful in the past. And so we were able to utilize their skills and lean into an awful lot of the work that they had done previously with creating these sort of naturalistic worlds. We had originally intended to fly to various locations and ended up not being able to do that. So they created full CG worlds for us. We also used Rising Sun Pictures in Australia, who created the world of Ta Lo. And Ta Lo is this massive sequence and this massive environment that is sort of works for the last third to a half of the film. And that was an environment that was spread over about 30 square miles, and it was shared amongst two other visual effects companies, both Weta and Trickster. But they actually designed the world and created this photorealistic, beautiful, surreal world, this lakeside world, which we were incredibly pleased with. Scanline Visual Effects, who are based in both Canada and also in the US, they were responsible for working with the bamboo forest, which you see it pretty much at the opening sequences, one of the opening sort of martial arts dance sequences in the film, but also responsible for a lot of the very heavy lifting of the simulations of the bamboo forest itself chasing a car through this animating world. And then Method, which was also in Australia, Method Melbourne, they created a bunch of different sequences throughout the film. And again, you're leaning into their strengths. And in this case, they had done some incredible work in the past with battles and large numbers of people. So we tasked them with creating the world at the very beginning of the film and creating those epic fight sequences and stringing together some very complex photography, multiple takes, and also working on the fight sequences between the brother and the sister in the fight club. So it's throughout the whole thing, you're trying to find the best cast. Finn Design worked on a few of the sequences, or one of the sequences where we have water exploding out of a wall. It's a very small sequence, but beautifully crafted. And it's a real example of where you would go to a boutique visual effects company to allow them to just a very, very small number of shots. I think it was about 13 shots, and it took about 13 months. So it was an awfully time-intensive sequence, but a beautifully crafted, I think, sequence where this water explodes out and we reveal a water map. And then we have We have both Luma, who created the bus sequence, which we've already talked about, the iconic sequence there, and they worked with Joe specifically, and Rodeo Effects, who created the Macau sequence, and again, the hanging off the side of a building and the fight sequence there. So all the time you're trying to cast these companies, trying to find the best groups with the best talent who are able to work at an incredibly high level. And from my perspective and Joe's perspective, working with these teams, I think I can say for him as well, it's just such an honor to work with so many incredibly talented people.
Well, it is pretty amazing. And what I've noticed, I mean, clearly this is a global production that you've been dealing with here. And by choosing the best of breed, and then again, finding those companies where you can challenge them, provide some interesting opportunities. But I remember the day when a single visual effects house did all the visual effects in the movie. And then slowly it changed to multiple vendors would do individual sequences for a movie. Now we're at the point where vendors do a component of a scene that somebody else is also working on. So the entire idea of how these things work together, which never really had to be part of it, is a big deal now. So you mentioned this idea of building this massive set that had to be shared between facilities. How much effort had to go into that process of building assets they know they're going to have to share with very different pipelines?
Absolutely. It's one of the things that we say at the very beginning. You're absolutely right in terms of the way that the industry has changed and the way that we make films. And I think it's also depending on the filmmakers and the studios of what you need. Marvel is famous for chasing the best movie they can until the very last minute. And what that means is that you need people to be able to do, quickly adapt. And if you're asking, one company to quickly adapt on 2,000 shots, they can't do that. But if you're asking a company to adapt on 50 shots, then they can do that. So my job and Joe's job is to try and bring these companies all up to, I liken it to being a sort of a chef in the kitchen, and my job is to try and bring all the pots up to the boil all at the same time. And
definitely a conductor.
Or a conductor, with an orchestra. You try and bring it all up, and if you only have one pot, then you don't have the flexibility and the control. So you need to be able to pass out the shots to as many vendors as is sort of sensible, and work that way. And I think that the challenge then from our end and from a production end is to try and make sure that where the quality is always at the same level throughout. And that then brings into this idea of communication and collaboration. And it means that we have to collaborate and with our visual effects companies and with people like Sean. And at the very beginning, say, look, this is our plan. We will be sharing this asset. There was a character that Weta created, the Foo Dog, and they created this 30 million haired mystical creature that they built, and they then handed that off to another company, to Trickster, who did some of the shots as well. So it was a very complex character. And so what you need to do is you need to build that asset in a way that works with the other company's pipeline. And that's where you get on the phone and you get onto Zoom calls and whatever, and you sit and you talk about, okay, so what's your pipeline? It's different from ours, but we can give you this, and can you give us that? And we need these. And it's the same with the world of Ta-Lo, a very, very complex environment, which is using an awful lot of proprietary stuff to create something which is so huge and so dense and so detailed. And so that has to be built in a way that can be handled by, in this case, the other two companies. So it's very much a matter of collaborating and communicating from the very beginning to try and set this up so that you set it up for success for everybody.
Well, kudos, because it really is remarkable. I mean, having come from this world, I can always appreciate the finesse that goes into the last 2%, and that's what gives it the style. And it's so much harder to do that when you've got this village of vendors coming into it. So it's a testament to the communication skills, the creative skills that you and your team have to be able to look like this, a cohesive whole, when it's really a gazillion different pieces coming from a whole bunch of different places. So kudos to that. It's really pretty amazing.
It helps when you work with a lot of talented people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that the vendors did an amazing job being able to work individually themselves, because they were used to be, Sean had the luxury of being in New Zealand, where they could all sort of still huddle up around a monitor and do that classic point at the monitor and say, it should be like this. Whereas most of the other crews that we were working with they were all in their basements, and the poor people up in Montreal, they were not only through a freezing winter, but they were all isolated as well. And so those guys, we had to support those guys and the struggles they were doing to get all their teams to work together too, because it is very much a collaborative world. And filming on set was tricky enough as it was, because sometimes we couldn't even stand beside each other. So there was a lot of that, and then it only just got exemplified until eventually we were back here and we couldn't even work with our coordinators in the same room. So it was hard.
It's amazing. Well, again, congratulations. The work is stunning. It really is. And so we have a couple of last sequences we want to share with you that take you behind the scenes with the team at Weta. So Sean, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about this. This is going to show basically, it's kind of a how-to, a breakdown on the evolution of some of these sequences seen through the compositing process. And seeing these transformations is endlessly entertaining. Tell us, as we're ready to show this clip, what we're about to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a clip about the all the different layers and the compositing that we had to do to augment what was shot on set in Sydney, and how we had to manipulate the plates and create an environment that told the story that they're living in, that they are battling in this sort of oppressive, deep and dangerous place. Obviously, there's lots of creature work and fighting between essentially good and evil, demons, humans, and all of the human helpers, I guess, the food dogs and all the soldiers.
One of the very interesting things about shooting in Australia was we were blessed with bright sunshine and beautiful days. Unfortunately, we didn't actually want bright sunshine and beautiful days. We wanted it dark and moody. So it made an incredibly challenging compositing for a lot of the sequences in Talo, and I think testament to the artistry of some very talented folks to make it feel much more overcast and gloomy than it really was in beautiful sunny Sydney.
Yeah,
day for night is a very hard thing to pull off.
Yeah. So this is the Battle of Talo. The demons have just come out of the opposite side of the lake, which is known as the Mountain of Souls. That's where the beast and all of these demons and bad guys are all caged, essentially. They fly over, and then we have a little bit of a battle between the demons and the good guys. So we filmed this in sunny Australia, which is great if you want lovely sunlit scenes. But for us, we had to make this a bit more of a oppressed and gloomy environment. So there were lots and lots of challenges there. On set, Chris and the team did a pretty good job of managing to flag a lot of the foreground action. They did this with a huge crane suspended sheet in the sky. And so you can see in some of these clips, just the foreground is nice and shadowed. But everything beyond that shadow, so there's kind of a bit of a harsh shadow line on the ground. Everything behind that shadow either had to be graded in a way that felt like it was a gloomy, cloudy environment, or just flat out replaced. And a lot of the time we just had to flat out replace it. The sun in Australia burns bright, and a lot of the environment, Talo and the village, was all hit by hard sunlight. So a lot of the surfaces that were specular, they just get too hot to be able to grade properly. So yeah, a lot of what you see is completely digital. We had to, we wanted to keep it sort of authentic to what they shot. So all of the characters, all of the stunties in the background, we would match move entirely and replace their performances with a digital version, just lit using a CG environment that matched the rest of this lighting. And lots and lots of incredibly talented compositors had to augment and fix and balance these plates in a way that made the whole environment feel like it was shot in this intense, dramatic, cloudy environment.
So for our final clip, we have another piece from the Weta Effects team. And this is some of the water simulations you did with the Dragon. And as Christopher mentioned earlier, you know, you want to hire vendors that do things amazingly well. And of course, Weta Effects does a lot of things amazingly well, but I'm always impressed with the water simulation that you do, because it doesn't look like simulations. It looks like water, which is kind of the whole point. So we know that water simulations can be particularly difficult and challenging in visual effects, and seeing how the scene evolves through the compositing process and how many elements really go into making this look realistic is pretty impressive. So as we roll this last clip, we'd love to have you tell us a bit about what we're seeing.
Yeah, okay. So the end battle obviously involves a lot of water simulation work. The dragon itself is a water dragon, so it's able to manipulate water in a way that allows it to subdue the beast. All of this water was particularly challenging. We've done plenty of realistic water before, and the big challenge here is that water just simply doesn't, act in this way. So it's all being manipulated in a magical way, and the key there is, or what we had found was that we needed to treat it a little bit like a character in itself. So we had puppets and rigs that defined the water shapes, allowed us to get buy-off from the filmmakers, describing the composition of every shot. And we kind of had a bit of a workflow that allowed us to have multiple artists working on every shot at the same time. The idea being each individual element is actually handcrafted by a single artist. So all the spray was done by a single artist, all the water surface was done by a single artist, the spirals that you see come up was all done by a single artist. It allowed multiple artists to work on multiple shots at the same time and kind of bring them all up to the same level at the same time as well. And, if you just have one artist working on a single shot like this, you're going to find it's going to take forever to get through. So, so that was the key to getting it all done. The big thing here is that no matter what the water is doing, even if it's completely unnatural, we wanted to have a base in reality. So all of our water surface, our spray, our shading, all had to be based in reality. We looked at a lot of ocean footage, relied on a lot of old technology, as well as a lot of new technology. So we've been developing a lot of water technology recently, and we used as much of that as we possibly could to get this, this beautiful, spirally, massive, magical ocean.
Christopher, Joe, Sean, thank you so much for sharing these amazing clips and sequences with us today and talking a bit about the incredible work that went into bringing them to life for us. It's really much appreciated. You really did an amazing job bringing the story to life in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is no tall order, right? I mean, it's probably the tallest of all orders to satisfy the Marvel Universe and the fans. So job well done. And we think your trophy cases will all be a little shinier and fuller by the end of this awards season. So thank you all. And we really look forward to seeing more of your work in the future, because I know the work never stops. So keep it coming.
Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
So that's it for this episode of Remote Control. Be sure to like this episode, share your comments, and subscribe to the AIS channel. We'll also hope you'll share this with your friends and collaborators in the entertainment and technology industries. We want to thank Gary Radburn and Matt Allard at Dell, Rick Champagne at NVIDIA, the NAB Show, Computer Graphics World, Michael Mansouri, and Meetmo for their Meetmo production platform. And of course, a very special thanks to Marvel Studios and Weta Effects for sharing their talented visual effects team with us today. Thank you for watching this episode of AIS Remote Control, brought to you by Dell. See you next time.